Good morning. I'm Genevieve Johnson. I'm the coordinator for the Desert LCC, and Kevin and I will be tag teaming today, so he'll come up and finish up the presentation for you in just a few minutes. So we are presenting today about resources for landscape scale conservation. And LCCs really are founded on the concept of conservation activities in the past that have been successful. We talk a lot about the issues that are facing the conservation community today, but we always like to try to remind people that we have done good things in the past and that we've done them on a pretty large scale. So responding to the Dust Bowl, environmental contaminants, and depletion of wetlands are just a couple of examples of issues that we've faced as a nation that we've actually handled in a fairly decent manner. However, a lot of these issues have been compounded by additional challenges, especially related to population growth, habitat fragmentation, isolation for genetics, as you heard this morning with the tamarisk, invasive species, water scarcity, energy development, et cetera. And of course, all of this happens to be compounded by climate change. So in 2009, there was a Department of Interior secretarial order that established the Landscape Conservation Cooperatives, as well as the Climate Science Centers, which we won't talk about today, but if you have questions about, you can certainly contact both me and Kevin. The Landscape Conservation Cooperatives, or LCCs, because it's government and we couldn't come up with a shorter name, really span North America. It goes from Canada all the way down to Mexico. And this is the Southern Rockies LCC, which we'll be concentrating on today, and this is the Desert LCC. But there are 22 LCCs, so no matter where you sit in the country, if you're visiting from anywhere, you are within an LCC, and if you're interested, you can certainly contact the folks who are involved in those besides me and Kevin. So what are LCCs? Well, I guess I'll go back to this. LCCs were really developed based on eco-regional boundaries, and so for the first time looking at huge landscapes that cross jurisdictional scales. They're public-private partnerships. In other words, we are a giant collaborative, not only of federal governments, agencies, but state governments, NGOs, universities, tribes. In the case of the Desert LCC, which extends about 60% of our geography into northern Mexico, we also have partners that comprise all of those groups on the other side of the border. That relates a little bit to the presentation that you might have seen yesterday in the morning, where all the U.S. maps sort of stop right here. Well, LCCs to some degree are trying to stop that in dealing with landscapes that cross those jurisdictional boundaries. In the desert, we're 15 states. We really do focus on the Mojave, Sonoran, and Chihuahuan deserts, including all the riparian ecosystems in there, which of course you've heard are super important to the arid systems, and the Madrean archipelago, or the Sky Island regions, which again is a really diverse area. In the Southern Rockies, which is all through here, again, focusing on ecoregions and covering 5 states in Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. Focusing a lot on the headwaters of major rivers. So again, this being a super important resource for all of us down below in the south as well. LCCs were really formed to support and enhance on-the-ground management activities. So everybody's already doing all of this great work, but it doesn't seem to be making a dent in some of the objectives and conservation goals that we have for populations or restoration activities across the landscape. And it's not that all of that isn't working, it's just that we haven't really provided a larger context for the work that everybody does. So LCCs try to provide that context by helping produce and disseminate applied science that managers really need at a landscape scale. We're trying to link that science and that conservation delivery. You've heard a lot about informing management, but this is supposed to be a two-way conversation. It's not that we're developing science and giving it to managers, it's that we're working with managers to find out what kind of questions they have, work with the researchers so that they are actually co-producing science so that that information can be used together, and not duplicating any existing efforts, but instead trying to fill those really critical gaps between all the work that folks are already doing. LCCs also really provide a forum for a collaborative adaptive management. We are working within a climate smart framework, again, really trying to fold in climate adaptation strategies into the work that everybody's already doing. Most folks are struggling with how to do this. It's not really rocket science, but in everybody's day-to-day activities, when they're super busy, they don't necessarily have the time or the ability to think about things proactively. And so LCCs, because we make you come to meetings and talk to us on the phone, provide for that opportunity. Adaptive management, everybody's already seen this. I'm sure the circle changes a little bit, but basically, identify conservation goals and objectives. And what we're doing within LCCs is really identifying those conservation goals and objectives that are common between really large groups of folks so that we can focus, assessing the vulnerabilities of those resources towards those goals and objectives, working through the science that's needed to support them, identifying adaptive management options, and then again, collaboratively working with our partners to look at what our suite of options are and then agreeing on maybe what some best steps are together. This is just to show you basically that between the desert and the LCC, we have all of these folks who participate on our steering committees. On our working groups, we actually have additional partners, so the list gets pretty long. These are all the folks involved in the desert. These are all the folks that are involved in both, and these are all the folks involved in the Southern Rockies, again, at the steering committee level. And so the point of that is basically if you have many options to get involved with us if you want, and we like having lots of people to talk to. So how do we really identify and meet those needs? We work with a big group of people. The main point of this slide, as well as you'll hear Kevin reiterate later, is that if you have some pressing needs and if you have some information you want to share, we really need to hear from you. So we have a partnership community, basically folks who are interested in what we're doing or have some questions, maybe don't have a lot of time to be actively involved on a regular basis, but kind of want to keep touch with what's going on. We ask them lots of questions about what you need. We talk a lot to everybody, trying to figure this out. That information comes in, goes to our steering committee, who provides the direction for the LCC. We all have staff that help support the efforts, and then we have lots of working groups who really go through and identify science and capacity needs to meet resource management goals. That information goes back out and it just kind of cycles. I really highlighted here this idea of our teams that are identifying science and capacity needs. So this is really where we spend a lot of our time and working together. LCCs try to really inform management by looking at science acquisition, science development, and science delivery. So a lot of that is communication, trying to figure out what people need, doing the actual work, and then making sure that we're communicating those outputs back to the folks who asked the question in the first place. So science acquisition, identifying the what we care about. We, in both LCCs, have focused on what we call focal resources, focal ecosystems. Within the Desert LCC, these are rivers, streams, aquatic and riparian areas, springs, and the associated aquatic and riparian systems, grasslands, shrublands, and species vulnerable to climate change. So our working groups are focusing specifically on these questions, trying to, again, identify priority science needs that we will then work towards funding in the future. Same thing for the Southern Rockies, but their focal resources and ecosystems are cultural resources, native fish, stream flows, so we have that in common. We just like to call things by different titles, mule deer and elk, and sage grouse. The Southern Rockies LCC has also picked focal geographies, so if you happen to sit in one of these locations, you might want to give Kevin a call, find out kind of what's going on within these specific areas. That's one of the issues that LCCs have struggled with, is that idea of scale. So we have these huge landscapes, which is interesting and looks kind of cool on a map, but when you sit in your office in Escalante, why does that matter to you? So we're also starting to downscale and focus on very specific areas. So in the Southern Rockies, they've focused on the Green River Basin, the Rio Grande, and the Four Corners area. And in the Desert LCC, we will also start selecting focal geographies, but we're going to do that in a slightly different way through our landscape conservation design process, which Kevin will go through in a little bit. So identifying the how, I can't emphasize this enough. It's all about the people. We talk and we talk and we talk. We come to conferences. We invite people to our conferences, and it all sounds really fluffy. And when people want to know what you're doing and you say, well, I went to 50 meetings last year, that's not exciting to them. but that's the way that people communicate. It's the way that we build relationships. It's the way that we build trust. And it's really how you get to the nitty gritty of what people really want. When you spend 5 minutes talking to somebody and they say, oh, we need to know more about tamarisk beetle. That sounds great. Until you go and try to tell a researcher what that means. And then the researcher has lots and lots of questions that you have no idea how to answer. And so you have to go back and connect the manager to the researcher so that they can really get at what is intended by the question. So these are some of the folks. And we also rely really heavily on folks in our partnership. All of these people down here are all team leaders for us that actually help. Well, they volunteer their time, basically. None of these folks are paid. They volunteer their time to lead groups talking about resources that are of concern to them. So there was my hint. The Desert LCC also, the Desert LCC and the Southern Rockies LCC also fund science. This is one of the options for resources available for work that folks are doing. And both the Desert and the Southern Rockies began funding projects in 2011, and through last year, we focused early on a lot on broad science needs because the partnership, we hadn't spent all that time talking yet. So people had some general science needs. We spent a lot of time kind of putting that out. We used a mechanism, RFPs, requests for proposals, or in the case of Bureau of Reclamation, which funds part of these LCCs, it's a funding opportunity announcement. We've done that every year until this year. So that's sort of a new change for us due to reduced budgets. And also a focus of the LCCs on starting to target the specific capacity and science needs that are coming out of the discussions within our partnership. We've sort of switched a little bit this year, again, because of reduced budgets, from doing a general sort of competitive funding announcement to really needing to target specific needs and capacities that have come out of our working groups and our steering committees. The cool thing about this really is that this blue portion here and here is all of the partners funding. It's all the matching funds that partners bring to the table. So this proves to some degree that really these projects are super important, not just to the folks who are sitting around a steering committee table, but to everybody else in the geographies. And Kevin's gonna take over now.
Yeah, I don't know what to say to you because the first half of this presentation you just saw and heard the best part of it, and so the second half, I don't know. Make sure your table trays and your seat backs are in their upright and locked positions because we're just going to auger in here. So anyway, so we are trying. I'm going to go through a couple of examples of some projects that the LCCs have, the Desert and Southern Rockies LCCs have been doing. To give you a sense of what we're up to and opportunities and ways to engage in the conservation dialogue. So our conservation development or our science development, really, we're trying to answer those where, what, when, why, how questions. If a manager has a specific objective that they're trying to achieve on the landscape, we try and answer through a lot of spatial analyses and geospatial displays. Try to answer, well, where do I restore? When do I manipulate? What do I protect? Those types of questions. So a couple of examples. Here's an example of a project in the in the Desert LCC where they're building off of the pulse flows that went to the Gulf or went to the Delta. And you heard a discussion about that yesterday. And so they're building off of that where they're taking the extant information, the data, whether it's monitoring, et cetera, and using that to build a new model that will predict what the ecological and the hydrologic responses you could expect under different pulse scenarios, whether it be duration, timing, magnitude, etc., all also combined with changing climate. And this model is also going to be something that is going to be able to you'll be able to use it on the fly, whereby you're sitting at a meeting and you're talking and you're discussing about potential pulse scenarios, you can run this model and use this tool, and it'll spit out the predictions for you in real time. Another example is we're working with BLM on their rapid eco-regional assessment for the Colorado Plateau. And so we are not only we're using BLM's data and information from the REA, not only across the Colorado Plateau, but also across the whole state of Utah to identify watersheds for optimal restoration. Now, we have individuals or entities that have different purposes for watershed restoration. It could be invasive species, it could be water quality, it could be for specific population objectives, etc. So we have multiple reasons why we're restoring watersheds. And what this model and this exercise is going to achieve, we're working towards, is it will identify the watersheds that are most conducive to being successful if your objective is water quality, or the watershed that is most conducive for restoration activities if your objective is a particular population objective. It also is going to have the ability to collate or conglomerate all of those needs and find out where multiple objectives can be achieved by working in specific watersheds. So that's a project that we're working on. So landscape conservation design, Genevieve mentioned LCD. It's often been described as a blueprint or a recipe for conservation across the landscape. It's both a process and a product. And so we've got a couple of geographies within the LCCs that we're implementing this landscape conservation design. And again, it is a product that will identify where and when and what individuals do across a landscape to achieve a specific objective for that landscape. And so in the Southern Rockies, we've identified these 3 geographic focal areas: the Green River Basin in Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, and the Rio Grande from Elephant Butte up to the headwaters, and then the San Juan, Little Colorado, the Four Corners area. And so we're starting conservation LCD project in the Green River Basin. That got funded and kicked off last year, and we're in the process of pulling a principal investigator for that. And we're also in talks with some individuals in the Rio Grande area to get that LCD project up and running as well. So our science delivery, we do that through a couple of different ways. A conservation planning atlas is one of them. The conservation planning atlas is based on database platform, and it is an opportunity or it's a tool to be able to, individuals can go in and they can gather data, whether it's geospatial data, and they can bring that in on their desktop and begin to manipulate or utilize the data to create decision support tools for their specific purposes. And you can generate galleries within the conservation planning atlases. You can develop work groups and produce products and decision support tools within groups right there on your laptops. We also have LCMap, which is based on USGS's science-based platform. There again, it's another way to discover and interrogate data, and it works very well with ARC-10. So if you're very savvy in ARC-10, LCMap is a real good way to, again, discover and interrogate data. And then webinars and workshops are other ways that we help try and get the science and the decision support tools out to folks. So just kind of moving forward, some of the things that the LCCs, the Desert and Southern Rockies LCC, are going to be working on. The Desert is going to be working on the second phase of the environmental flows database along with a BMP manual. And the Southern Rockies LCC is working with USGS to do a stream gauge optimization study. And then we're also, as Genevieve pointed out, since 2011 through 2014, we've been funding science projects. And so now we're going to take some time to sit down, look at those, and synthesize those across the landscape and identify where perhaps there are some data gaps or where some of the science that other individuals are generating can be integrated into where all the science can be integrated to answer some of those where, what, when, why, how questions. So what? Well, as they say up back home in North Dakota, I don't give a good goose fart on a muggy day. So who cares about all this? Okay. Well, the thing is, you saw the number of partners that participate in the LCCs, the Desert and the Southern Rockies. And pretty much most of the entities here today is either, your entity is either represented on our steering committee or is an entity that you work with and they're represented on our steering committee. And that is how the LCCs function, is at the direction of the steering committees. And the individuals that sit on those steering committees and in our work groups, they're the ones that they're the engines that generate the information, generate the drive and the needs. So if you're present at the table and you're participating in opportunities like when we reach out for scoping for the landscape conservation design projects or for the Colorado Plateau REA watershed optimization project, when we're reaching out for input, that's your opportunity to tell us what your needs and what your concerns are so that we can incorporate them. So either coordinate work with Genevieve and I, and our contact information is right here. We have all the information as to who the individuals are that sit on our steering committees, all on our websites, on our science working groups. Get in touch with those people and let them know what is eating your lunch so they can bring that to the table for the LCCs and we can incorporate that and try and address those. So, thank you.